Good evening, and welcome to Workshop 3 of Soil Smarts for the Department of Toxic Substances Control, also known as DTSC. This is the interactive learning series on the soil cleanup at Santa Susana Field Laboratory, known as SSFL. My name is Eric Mueller, and I am the Public Participation Specialist for the Office of Environmental Equity at DTSC.
And good evening. My name is Reka Modest, and I'm also a Public Participation Specialist with the Office of Environmental Equity at DTSC.
We would also like to acknowledge our DTSC leadership participating in the workshop this evening. SMRP Deputy Director Elizabeth Van Berg, Deputy Director of the Office of Environmental Equity Sorlene Grant, and Deputy Director of Communications Allison Westcott. Also, based on the registration for this workshop, we are joined this evening by staff and representatives from the City of Simi Valley, Ventura County, LA County, State Senate Environmental Quality Committee, and State Senator Stern's office. Welcome, everyone. The Department of Toxic Substances Control's mission is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. DTSC respectfully acknowledges that we conduct our work on the unceded indigenous lands of over 200 distinct native tribes within the state of California. DTSC recognizes all California Native American tribes, regardless of federal recognition. We honor the indigenous communities who have stewarded this land for generations, and we recognize their enduring relationship with the land, waters, plants, and animals that are integral to the culture and heritage. In acknowledgement of these tribes, we strive to approach our work here with respect for the historical and cultural significance of this area. Tonight, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you please be courteous to all meeting attendees. When providing input or asking questions verbally, please speak clearly and at an even pace. Please note that you may be muted if necessary. We ask that you please hold raising your hand until we reach the Q&A segment. Any hands raised before the Q&A segment starts will be lowered. You may have noticed that the Q&A section is not enabled. Instead, we will facilitate a focused Q&A segment where we'll address questions specific to tonight's topic. In addition, the familiar open forum will be towards the end, where you can elevate any questions related to the presentation and materials. During the Q&A segments, we ask that all questions remain focused on the focused topics. If your question falls outside of the scope of this discussion, you can bring it up during the open forum or use our stream tool. Please be concise and respectful to ensure everyone has the chance to participate. Please keep your questions brief. The open forum at the end will allow up to 2 minutes per speaker, but focused Q&A participation will be shorter to fit within our time frame for this workshop. If we can't get to your question, please submit it through the stream platform. Also, the chat feature will be used for DTSC informational purposes. Please pay close attention to this chat to receive important DTSC information, contact information, and updates. We will allow you additional time after the public workshop to obtain information posted on the chat. DTSC does not have the Q&A function on Zoom activated tonight, so we encourage active dialogue. Please submit any additional questions or input through our new Stream tool. Stream is the Santa Susana Field Laboratory tool for response, engagement, and answer management. This system allows community members to ask questions, report issues, or leave comments relating to the SSFL cleanup. Please access Stream by visiting the DTSC SSFL main page or the Stream page at the URL on your screen. Tonight is the third Soil Smarts workshop. The Soil Smarts workshop series is designed to help all interested parties understand the steps we are taking regarding soil cleanup at SSFL, especially the efforts by NASA and the Department of Energy to ensure soil is cleaned up to the local background levels. Materials from this series are updated periodically and are available on the DTSC SSFL Soil Smarts webpage. And now we will transition to the workshop presentation. To present on multiple lines of evidence approach for chemical cleanup to background, I would like to introduce Dr. Valerie Hanley, Senior Toxicologist at DTSC with our Human and Ecological Risk Office for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory project site. Dr. Hanley.
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us here tonight. I'm going to do a quick overview of the agenda before we get started. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the Soil Smarts Workshop series, where we've been and where we're going. We will discuss the key messages that were shared during the first two workshops. We will have a brief overview of DTSC's multiple lines of evidence approach proposal, as well as go through a interactive question and answer period directly focused on the multiple lines of evidence approach technical memorandum that DTSC posted last month. And finally, we will have the familiar open forum, which will be allowed for at least 30 minutes at the end of the meeting for you to make your statements or ask any questions that were not covered previous in the meeting. So to orient everyone, so again, this is our third workshop in the Soil Smarts Workshop series. The first two workshops were held in fall of last year, with the first one on November 20th, held online via Zoom, that was attended by approximately 130 members of the public and local media. Workshop 2 was an open house style workshop held at our DTSC Chatsworth office and was attended by approximately 50 members of the public and several media outlets. And now here we are at Workshop 3 to discuss the community feedback we've received so far and to solicit additional feedback. There are two additional workshops that we plan to have in the future to report out the results of two ongoing studies that the responsible parties are undertaking under DTSC's direction. There's the laboratory or MRL study that is ongoing, and we hope to report out those results in fall. And then in spring of next year, we will have the results from the backfill study, where the responsible parties are looking for available backfill that meets our needs to restore Santa Susana once the cleanup is complete. So our Soil Smarts series is really meant to be an educational series, and we provided a lot of detail in those first two workshops. So I'm hopeful that most of you here tonight have spent some time looking at the materials that we were prepared. We had several videos and fact sheets on the key technical issues that we discussed during those first two Soil Smarts workshops. These videos, along with a full recording of workshop number 1, is available within the Soil Smarts playlist on DTSC's YouTube page, DTSC Green, pictured here. As Eric mentioned, we have a website for the Soil Smarts Background Cleanup Workshop Series, which you can access using the QR code on the screen. All materials related to the Soil Smarts Workshop Series are posted on this website, including links to the videos shown on the previous slide, their companion fact sheets, the posters that were presented at workshop number 2, as well as the multiple lines of evidence technical memorandum, which we will be discussing in more detail tonight. Okay, so we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about the key messages from workshop number 1. So as you may know, NASA and DOE are contractually bound to clean up the soils at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory to levels consistent with local background levels for both chemicals and radionuclides. The focus of the Soil Smarts Workshop series is the chemical cleanup. The focus on chemicals is due to several technical issues associated with that cleanup. DTSC remains committed to the background cleanup outlined in the 2010 Administrative Orders on Consent. Part of the requirements of the AOCs were for DTSC to conduct a chemical background study. This chemical background study was used to establish local background levels, and then those were used to establish lookup table values. The chemical lookup table values were issued in 2013. Now, 52% of those lookup table values do represent local background concentrations, as determined by the DTSC chemical background study. And those are the BTV, or background threshold value based lookup table values. The other half of the lookup tables are actually based on method reporting limits. So 23% of the lookup tables are based off the minimum method reporting limit that was achieved in the background study for chemicals that were infrequently detected. Those are known as the BG-MRL lookup tables, shown in orange on this pie graph. It's important to remember that special methods were used to force those method reporting limits as low as possible to aid in site characterization. And then the lookup tables were based off the lowest achieved MRL for that study. The remaining 25% of the lookup table values are based on the method reporting limits from a multi-lab study where DTSC pulled several labs and their ability to achieve different reporting limits. So about 50% of our lookup tables are based off of local background, and the others are on method reporting limits. So one of the key concepts that we discussed in the first two workshops was that of false positives. This is when a chemical is detected above a lookup table, but the detection is not associated with site activities. We demonstrated that by using the lookup tables that were developed using the background study and applying them back to those same background soils that were used to develop them. We found that of the 295 total samples that were collected from the background studies, 158 of those samples failed the comparison to the lookup table values. So some of that was due to detections above the lookup table values, and some of that was due to method reporting limits for non-detected chemicals where that method reporting limits were above the lookup table based on the method reporting limit. So this represents a 54% failure rate. If these were site soils using our current lookup tables and the not to exceed approach, this would require that they be removed, even though these soils are the local background standard that we are looking to achieve. In summary, our lookup standards are so strict or so low that our background soils cannot even meet those standards. Of the more than 130 chemicals that are represented in the 2013 lookup table, the average value is more than 300,000 times lower than our health protective screening levels considering residential land use. Some of them are even 1 million times lower than those screening levels. Also, during workshop 1, we mentioned that 5 of our lookup tables are in fact above health protective values. And unfortunately, at that time, I was unable to come up with what those 5 chemicals were. So I wanted to spend a moment right now to respond to those questions. So there are 5 metals that are all naturally occurring in soils that were found in background soils at concentrations above the residential risk-based screening levels. Those are arsenic, chromium-6, cobalt, thallium, and zirconium. So this table lists the lookup table values, the residential screening level, and then whether that is based off of a cancer or a non-cancer endpoint and what the source is. And I do want to point out that while the arsenic lookup table value is much higher than our residential screening level, this is very common. All background soils have a concentration of arsenic that is above the residential risk-based screening level. And so it is common. It is the standard to default to a background cleanup for arsenic. So I just wanted to point those out. And all of this data is also included in the multiple lines of evidence tech memo. So the high false positive error rate, or that misidentification of soils as contaminated when they are not, is not only due to the low lookup tables, but also due to the not to exceed approach, which requires soils to be removed if there's any detection above the lookup table value. Using this approach will lead to the significant destruction of habitat, environment, and cultural resources. The AOCs state that DTSC is to determine the best option available when presented with confirmation sampling results that exceed lookup table values. It is with that clause that DTSC looked to achieve a method that would be within the confines of the AOC, but would allow us to reduce those false positive error rates. And so we have proposed this multiple lines of evidence approach. The use of this approach would limit the misidentification of soils as contaminated when they are not. And it provides a clear path forward towards our goal of achieving that cleanup to local background, which is our goal. The method is more reliable and less destructive. And while risk is used, it is used as a backstop to make sure that these modifications do not result in an increased risk to residents, both hypothetically on-site and then off-site residents as well. So we're going to make sure that we have a cleanup to background and that it's protective of human health. So what is meant by this multiple lines of evidence? Basically, it means you use different types of proof to support an idea. The approach makes an argument stronger and more reliable than relying on a single piece of information, such as being above or below a lookup table value. The use of multiple lines of evidence is considered a best practice by US EPA and environmental remediation in several cleanup documents, one of which is linked on the screen here. So we do want to reiterate that the MLE approach was developed by DTSC to address the technical issues associated with the confirmation sampling approach to verify the cleanup to local background at SSFL for NASA and DOE. DOE's notice of intent to prepare a supplemental environmental impact statement is independent of the work that DTSC is presenting here tonight. In fact, DTSC provided comments in a letter to DOE, which can be accessed by scanning the QR code on the screen, following the release of the notice of intent, which reasserts our commitment to the AOCs and the cleanup to background. The timing of the SEIS and the Soil Smarts Workshop Series is coincidental. Okay, so now I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through the multiple lines of evidence approach, which is outlined in this flow chart. I understand that this flow chart may be difficult to read, so the QR code on the screen will take you to this image online. I believe this the link will also be placed in the chat and you can access it there. And so if you're able to, that would be a great way so that you can easily see the different lines of evidence as we work through this tonight, but we will have this same image on the screen as we go through. So remember, each line of evidence asks a specific question. And to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to actually be walking us through this evaluation process using the multiple lines of evidence approach, using a sample that was collected at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory site. So this sample, LXB-S 1245S001, was collected from the liquid oxygen RFI site in NASA Area 1, the source of which is indicated by the blue rectangle on the map. The sample, circled here in red, is outside of the boundaries of that source area. Now, this data table shows every chemical detection that for this particular soil sample. There are dioxins, which you may sometimes see listed as TCDD, TEQ, but we're going to call them dioxins for simplicity tonight. They do represent a group of chemicals that are dioxins and furans that all get added together to have a single value. So the dioxins are there. There was also total petroleum hydrocarbons detected in this sample, as well as 25 different metals. Of these 27 detections, 2 of them are above their lookup table value, and those are the dioxins and the silver. Now, using the not to exceed approach from the confirmation sampling protocol, this sample would require removal due to these detections. However, we're going to evaluate this further using the multiple lines of evidence approach. So the first line of evidence evaluates the lookup table values and asks the question, was the chemical detected in the background study? Well, both dioxins and silver were in fact detected in those background soils from the background reference areas in DTSC's chemical background study. So then we move to 1A, which is the detection consistent with local background? So here in this table, we are evaluating this first line of evidence for the 2 chemicals that were detected above their lookup table value, dioxins and silver. So moving forward with this multiple lines of evidence approach, any chemical above its lookup table would be evaluated using this line of evidence. So here you can see in this table, we have the lookup table values for each of these two chemicals. And then we're also noting what the maximum background detection from the chemical background study is, and we can compare that to the sample detection. So in our sample at LXBS 1245 S001, we had about 1.27 picograms per gram of dioxins, and that is less than the maximum concentration that was seen in the background study of 1.44. So this is a supporting line of evidence. This sample is within background, okay, even though it is above the lookup table value. Now for silver, the maximum background concentrate detection was 0.2 milligrams per kilogram compared to our sample detection of 0.209 milligrams per kilogram. So while it is a very minor increase over the background concentration of 0.009 milligrams per kilogram, it is in fact above that value. And so we say, no, this is not within background. And this is considered a neutral line of evidence. So that doesn't fail this sample, but it means we need to consider other lines of evidence about silver, particularly for this sample. Okay, in the second line of evidence, we ask, is the detection below the health protective screening levels for residential land use? Now, there are no plans to redevelop the Santa Susana Field Laboratory for residential land use. However, residential land use is the standard that we typically apply within the state of California and really nationwide to achieve a no further action determination or to have unrestricted land use. So this seems like an appropriate screening level for us to look at for here at the site. So once again, here we have our chemicals, dioxin and silver, with their lookup tables, and now we are showing the residential health protective screening level. I do want to note that this information is provided in the tables in the multiple lines of evidence tech memo, which we'll be discussing a little bit later tonight. Both the screening levels as well as those maximum background concentrations are listed in the table alongside the lookup table values. Okay. So for dioxins and silver in this line of evidence, we can see that the sample detection is below both the residential health protective screening level for both dioxins and silver. And what I really want to draw your attention to is that for silver, our sample detection, remember, while it was slightly above our background sample of our lookup table value of 0.2, it is significantly lower than the health protective screening level for residential land use. In fact, it's 1,800 times lower than that residential screening level. So these are both supporting lines of evidence for dioxins, for both the dioxin and the silver in this sample. These are both supporting lines of evidence based off of line 2. So in line number 3, we ask, is the cumulative risk of the sample, the cumulative risk or hazard of the sample below the point of departure? So the point of departure for cancer is a risk of 1 times 10 to the minus 6 or 1 in 1 million and a hazard index of 1. So a hazard index is for non-cancer associated endpoints. And then the risk is a potential risk of cancer if you were exposed to that concentration. Now, one thing I really do want to point out is that in those first 2 steps we looked at, we were looking at the 2 chemicals detected above their lookup table value. But when we move into steps 3 and 4, we are looking at all of the detections. So we're looking at that cumulative risk and hazard. This considers all the detections in the sample. So the risk and hazards associated with each chemical detected in the sample are added together, resulting in a single cumulative risk and a single cumulative hazard associated with this sample location. And then those the risk/hazard is then compared to the point of departure for residential land use, which again is 1 in 1 million for risk and a hazard index of 1. So one thing I do want to point out is that the proposed multiple lines of evidence approach does not consider the contribution of risks or hazards associated with those 5 metals that have the lookup tables above residential risk-based screening levels, that table I showed a few slides previous. And this choice was made to prevent the masking of actual risk associated with chemicals on site from masking the risks and hazards associated with the actual chemicals that might be present due to site activities. So now evaluating our sample, here we have again, we're looking at our sample and we looked at every single chemical. So this table has all of the chemicals. You'll notice that arsenic, cobalt, and thallium are grayed out in this table. And that's because those three do have lookup table values above the risk-based screening levels. So they were not considered in this analysis. But I do want to note that none of those were detected above their lookup table in this sample. So the cumulative risk for this sample is 3 times 10 to the minus 7, or 3 in 10 million. And so that is below the point of departure of 1 in a million. And the cumulative hazard for this sample is 0.43, which is below the point of departure for hazard of 1. Okay, so these are supporting lines of evidence for this sample. Again, this is a sample-wide looking at all detections within this sample. So this is supporting line of evidence that for this sample location, we do not have an excess risk associated with it. Now, the fourth line of evidence takes that same cumulative risk and hazard that we just looked at for the sample, but now it calculates a cumulative risk and hazard for the same set of chemicals, only now instead of using the detections from the sample, we use the approved lookup table value. And so we have a cumulative risk and hazard associated with the lookup table values and one associated with the actual detections in the sample, and then we compare those two. So here are the results for our example sample. So here again, in this first column, or I guess the second column, you'll see we have the risk and hazard associated with our sample. These are the same values that were on that previous slide of 3 times 10 to the minus 7 and 0.43. And now we're showing the risk and hazard associated with the lookup table values. Again, the same set of chemicals, but using the lookup table values. And here we see the lookup table values have an associated risk of 2 times 10 to the minus 7. Now we take a ratio between these two values, and the ratio is 1.39. So we consider that to be basically equivalent to 1, a ratio of 1 or equal or less than 1. Is a supporting line of evidence. And our hazard, we can see the hazard associated with the lookup table values is actually quite a bit higher than the hazard associated with what the actual detections in this sample were. And the ratio is 0.2. So again, these are supporting lines of evidence that the risk and hazard that are associated with this sample location are lower than the risk and hazard that would be acceptable using the lookup table values that were established in 2013. I do want to point out that this line of evidence, similar to the previous one, does not use those these chemicals that have lookup table values above our risk-based levels. That's why the arsenic, cobalt, and thallium are grayed out in this particular table. So now here we have a summary for this sample LXBS 1245S001. And what we can see is that each of these two chemicals that were detected above their lookup table value have at least 3 supporting lines of evidence that show that no further soil removal is required. And the proposal in the multiple lines of evidence technical memorandum is that if we had at least 3 supporting lines of evidence, then that would be sufficient for us to determine that no further soil would be needed. And so this location would remain as it is. So I hope that this was helpful in terms of demonstrating exactly how this would be applied as we walked through it with one sample. So some of the questions that we've received about the multiple lines of evidence approach. Of course, is this a risk-based cleanup? And it is not a risk-based cleanup. This is still a cleanup to background. We're using risk to ensure that the modifications that we're making do not result in any kind of an increased risk to human health. And we're using it to make sure that we can limit unnecessary destruction of habitat and removal of soil that will then need to be replaced and disposed of, and everything that comes with soil removal. But this evaluation is still on a sample by sample basis. It is not normal that we would base a cleanup on a point-by-point basis using risk. Typically, there would be area averaging, and you'd come up with an exposure point concentration. We're not doing that here. So this really lacks some of the fundamental pieces of a true risk-based cleanup. So this is not a risk-based cleanup. Another question that we've heard is the multiple lines of evidence approach protective of off-site residents? And the short answer to this is yes. Off-site exposures would be significantly lower than direct exposure on-site. Because remember, each individual sample collected from the NASA and DOE areas of the site would be evaluated as if it were an entire residential property, where someone would spend 24 hours a day, 350 days a year for 26 years. So that is not the case. This is every individual sample is being evaluated in that way. So this is very health protective. It would be health protective if there were ever someone to live on site, which again, we don't anticipate happening, but it's certainly protective for people that are off site as well. So another comment that we heard was that there was a need for us to have something a little bit more concrete, a more concrete document that people could comment on in terms of weighing in on the multiple lines of evidence proposal. We had produced a video and a fact sheet on the proposal, and that is Soil Smart's fact sheet and video number 5 called Unearthing a Better Approach. So we certainly recommend you go and watch that video and read that fact sheet. It was meant to be very digestible. And this one this technical memorandum gets a little bit meatier into some of the details. I do want to remind everyone that this is just a proposal. So this technical memorandum expands on our proposal to use the multiple lines of evidence to determine when that cleanup to local background has been achieved. We are seeking public feedback on this proposal. That's why we are here tonight. We are going to have this facilitated conversation, this discussion, so that we can hopefully get some good feedback from everybody. And all of the feedback will be carefully considered as we finalize this approach. And I do want to note, a new approach is needed to be able to implement this cleanup to background. We want to get this cleanup started, continue it on. We want to give the people the cleanup to background that was promised in the AOCs, but we're going to need to, find a way to move forward. And at this point, the multiple lines of evidence approach is our best path forward, absent any additional technically feasible recommendations. So with that, I'm going to, so we're going to help facilitate this productive, get us receiving productive comments on the proposed approach. We did put 5 questions at the end of the technical memorandum to help kind of guide you all in terms of how you could make comments. Now, you can, of course, make a comment that falls outside of these 5 questions, but this is going to help lead us through our discussion today. And so we're going to go through each of these one by one and we hope this to be, an interactive discussion. So again, we're going to go through each of those one by one. So if you've tried to raise your hand, we're going to ask that your hands are lowered. We're going to lower your hands for you if you don't do it yourself. Once I have the specific prompt up for a question, then you can raise your hands and then we'll go through and have the discussion. We don't have a timer that's going to be going for us to have comments, but we really do want to give people time. We have about 5 questions. We do have 5 questions, and we want to give about 10 minutes per question so that we can still allow you guys that 30 minutes of open forum at the end of the meeting to discuss anything further. So we may have to cut off certain questions if we have a lot of dialogue, and we might move through some of them quicker than others. If you don't get your question answered tonight or you're not able to submit your feedback, then please do use our stream portal, which again, the QR code on the screen will take you to that, and you can submit your comment or question on the stream portal, and then we will get back to you in the future. So again, please do remember to be concise and respectful as we go forward. Okay. So we're going to start off. We want to make sure that we are kind of understanding what these different lines of evidence are. So if there's a line of evidence that needs to be more clearly explained or expanded on, then we would like to know that. So that can be either just here tonight in the dialogue, something that you want me to explain right now, which of course I'm happy to do. Or if you've read through the technical memorandum and you think there needs to be additional details provided within the technical memorandum on any of the lines of evidence, then you can speak to that. I do want to remind everyone, you may raise your hand if this is something you would like to speak to. We are really trying to have this real focused time to answer each of these questions. If you start to go off subject, we will interrupt you and ask you to save this to the open forum, and you can raise your hand once we get to there, or you can submit through stream. But we can go ahead and if there are hands raised, I think we can go ahead and take our first question. Again, this is there a line of evidence that needs to be explained more clearly or expanded on? Please limit your comments to that. Eric and Reiko, do we have somebody with their hand up?
Yes. It seems we've got several hands, Dr. Hanley. The first hand being Cameron Kuta. Cameron Kuta.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Cameron.
Great. So I don't think there's any lines of evidence that need to be explained more clearly. I understand very clearly what DTSC is proposing here. It's a complete reversal of.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry for muting. I understand your point, and you can raise your hand in the future. But if someone actually has a line of evidence that needs to be expanded on, then we would be happy to hear from you. Do we have someone else with their hand raised?
We do. We've got a Gaskin. Gaskin. Go ahead with your question.
Gaskin, are you there?
Because Gaskin left.
And while we're waiting for the next one, I do want to acknowledge, we want you to be able to have your voices heard, and we will absolutely hear you. We just want to make sure that we get through some of these questions at this time. So yes, go ahead. We have someone else online.
Let's see, we've got a couple more. Oh, the Dory Raskin's there again. Dory Raskin, you sure you don't have a question? Okay, we're moving on to Julie Kornstein. Julie Kornstein.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, hi, Julie.
Hi, I'm a little confused because I listened to DOE the other day. They said something about that the land could be used for residential use with gardens. And I thought you said that it will not be used for residential. I'm confused. I'm sorry. I don't, you say background, but they say it can be. You said you don't think any homes will be built in the area. I don't know what type of guarantee there is. What is the difference in what they're saying and you're saying?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Julie. So there are, the 3 different RPs. So the Boeing company has a different agreement, so they don't have the background cleanup that NASA and DOE have under the AOCs. And so they do have a resident with garden pathway that they have to evaluate per their settlement agreement. Now, DOE has said that they are going to evaluate that. That breaks the AOCs. We are not doing a risk-based cleanup. And so while I understand that DOE is evaluating that, that's not what is going to happen here at Santa Susana. We have to evaluate as if the property could be used for residential because at this time there are not restrictions. Now there is a land easement in place that DTSC is not a party of. that does say it will be reserved for open space, that much of it will be. But you're right, there are no absolute guarantees that the site could not be used for residential. But again, what we're doing is making sure that it is cleaned up, even if it was being used for residential land use.
Who has the last say? I mean, who makes the final decision whether or not, and I thought at some point, I can't remember what session, that it's going to take 15 years for the cleanup. I'm sorry, I'm getting into another question, but I don't understand who has the final authority to make the decision, and is it a 15-year cleanup?
Yeah, Julie, great questions. I'm sorry that I really do want to focus us on the multiple lines of evidence approach. And so I'm going to say that you can either come back on at the end or submit your question and comment through stream, and then we can reply to you that way. But I want us to stick with evaluating this particular line, asking this question about if there's a line of evidence that needs to be expanded on. So please do raise your hand again, and we will happily answer your question. I just want us to keep us focused right now. But thank you so much for your question.
Okay, we've got a couple more hands. We've got another attendee, sorry, last four digits 528. Last four digits 528.
Are you there, caller?
One. Last three digits 528.
Reiko, can you remind them how to take? Oh, there they are. Hello.
Yeah, I had a question. I see in your table of first time detects the third quarter 2024, there was vinyl chloride was over the maximum concentration level for water. It was like well, and over the groundwater reference value also.
Right, so just real quick.
I'm wondering, I really wanted to clean up the soil.
I'm sorry. I will mute you in just a moment. We're not talking about groundwater. We're really focused on soil right now. So I will happily. I'm going to unmute you. I just really do want to keep us focused on if you need one of these lines of evidence to be expanded. And then again, we really do want to hear from you. We promise we're going to give you that time at the end. But I want to see. I'll ask you to unmute so you can please go ahead. If you have a contribution to this particular question. If not, then we'll ask you to save your question for later. I'm pushing ask to unmute, but I'm not sure if that works or not.
Unmute, you can also
there, she's back.
*6.
Sorry, yep, thank you.
I really wanted to clean up to be in a way for most protective of our health, not just the background level.
Yeah, absolutely. Protection of human health and the environment is DTSC's mission. I mean, it is a mission, but it is absolutely what the goal of all of us here is for it to be protective of human health. And that's why we did build in some of those lines of evidence. And that's different than the background cleanup, which actually doesn't evaluate the risk at all. But thank you. It doesn't sound like you've got a question about any of the lines of evidence. So I think if we've got anyone else, I think we could maybe take one more question if anybody has any clarity they need on any of the lines of evidence.
That's perfect. We have one more question from Bonnie Raskin. Oh, they're gone now. A question from Kit Stoles. Bonnie Raskin is gone. Now Kit Stoles.
Okay. Hi, Kit. Are you there?
Hi. I hope I'm here. Can you hear me?
I hear you. I can hear you. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm still puzzled by the idea that there are backgrounds.
Oops. Kit was muted. Did we?
Okay. Let me
there
try.
You go.
Okay.
Yep. I can hear you.
So could you talk a little more about the idea that there are background values off the site that are above the lookup table values? And could you give some examples? I just find that very puzzling.
Yeah. So there were some, and I will say, I spent quite a bit of time in the first workshop talking about the lookup table values and how they were established and why we actually have some background soils that are high concentrations that are above our lookup table values. So there's various things that are involved. Partially, it was decisions that were made and how the lookup table values were set. So there were statistics that were involved, and some of those statistics removed statistical outliers that were still could be true background samples, but because they were a little bit higher than the rest of the samples, they would be a statistical outlier. And so because of that, maybe some of those samples would have been removed from the data set, and then our final lookup table was lower than the maximum concentration that was actually found. Also, there are those lookup tables that are based on the background MRL study, the background MRL. And so those are samples, those are for chemicals that they might have been detected in the chemical background study, but they were only detected like a handful of times. And so because of that, there wasn't a robust data set to do that statistical analysis to set that background threshold value. And base the lookup table value on background. And so we defaulted to a reporting limit, which is really just how low can we possibly can a lab possibly go to reliably, show a level. And so because of some of those decisions that were made about the lookup tables, that's why some of the data from the background study that was used to create the lookup tables doesn't pass the lookup table values. And these decisions were made historically, with the goal of getting us the cleanup to background. And as we've started to apply them, we're just realizing that they really aren't enough. Some of those decisions that were made have resulted in our lookup tables values being too low. And so we were trying to counter that using some other lines of evidence to help us support, help us to determine when the cleanup has actually been achieved to background. I hope that answers your question. I mean, in general,
Sorry,
yeah.
It doesn't answer my question. Could you please use an example, a value that you found in the background offsite that was higher than, if I understand correctly, please use an example.
Sure, absolutely. So I will say in the multiple lines of evidence tech memo, there's a series of tables, not that you can really see this, but I'm looking at it right now. And it lists all of our lookup table values, and then it also lists the maximum detection from the background sample. So if I am just looking right now, for example, and then we've shaded in this, if the background detection was a lot higher than the lookup table, then it's shaded in these tables. So all of this data is in that multiple lines of evidence tech memo for you to see. So there are several herbicides that all have maximum background detections higher than the lookup table values. There are several metals, including antimony, beryllium, chromium, manganese, molybdenum, sodium. Let's see, there's a whole bunch of pesticides and some PAHs, all of which were found at higher concentrations in the background soils. So I definitely recommend you look at the tables that are in the MLE tech memo, because that does provide all of that information on those different chemicals where the maximum detection from the background reference soils was higher than the lookup table.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so
want to move on?
Yeah, I think so. So let's lower everybody's hands that are up right now. And then we're going to go on to our next question. So this is asking if there is an additional line of evidence that you would like to be considered. So we've talked about the different lines that are included in here, but maybe there's another line of evidence that you think we should consider. And so at this point, we'd like to hear from anybody who has a line of evidence that they think we should potentially add to our multiple lines of evidence approach proposal.
We've got a question, Dr. Hanley. We've got a question from a Haycon Williams. Haycon Williams, got several hands. Haycon's first.
All right. Hello. Haycon, are you there?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Hey, it took a minute to get the unmute option on my end.
No worries.
Um, no, there shouldn't be any more lines of evidence added. DTSC needs to stick with the AOC and abandon the whole line.
All right. Thank you for that. Sorry again, we're just going to keep focused on getting through these questions, and then you can make your statements at the end of the meeting during the open forum. And so is there another question with someone who actually has another line of evidence that they would like to be considered in our approach?
Yes, it looks like we've got another hand from a William Bowling. William Bowling. Go ahead.
Hi, I was thinking about the other lines of evidence should be historical use of that area.
Okay. So in terms of evaluating what chemicals were used on the location, is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, like if you find TCE at the LOX plant, you could look at the historical use and the LOX clean standard that NASA and the Air Force used.
Okay, yeah, no, I thank you for that. So this whole meeting is being recorded and we have a transcript, and so I appreciate that that helpful feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another hand, Dr. Hanley, from Julie Korenstein. Julie Korenstein.
Yeah, hi, you can hear me now?
Yep. Hi, Julie.
Similar to the gentleman that just spoke, I was wondering about radionuclides like plutonium, and is that being measured or looked into, or like the chemical perchlorate, because when they did the rocket testing and so forth, I don't see any of those in the list of things that you're testing. Can you please tell me?
Yeah, so radionuclides are going to be cleaned up to background. We are focusing on the chemical cleanup because that's where we have this high false positive error issue. The radionuclides will proceed as planned, and those will be cleaned up to background by all three responsible parties on the site. With regards to perchlorate, I am checking my, we do have perchlorate. So perchlorate is one of the chemicals that's listed on our table. And it is something that we will be evaluating. So we have a background level for perchlorate. So yes, that will absolutely be part of our analysis.
We've got another hand.
Yeah, you're saying that if you use having it up to background, is that safe for people to walk around the area, to take hikes, to have picnics, to bring children? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, so that's the multiple lines of evidence has all these risk-based evaluations, and that's on a location basis, right? So like I was trying to explain earlier, at every single location, we would compare that to a residential screening level, which means that whatever that concentration is, someone could be exposed to it over a whole long period of time as a resident, and that would be protective. So it would, in fact, also be protective of hikers and other on-site receptors. So, but the cleanup to background, it has a background value. And I will say that when, even when we look at background and we look at a calculated risk or hazard, there are associated risks and hazard with just background concentrations, but some of those are just like the Earth's surface, right? So we can't do anything about it. Perchlorate is not one of those. That's one that certainly due to the rocket testing, but it was found in our background soils. It has a pretty low background value, lookup table value of 1.63. And I will say, compared to the residential screening level of 55,000 micrograms per kilogram, the background would be very protective.
Will there be some areas that will be permitted and other areas where there'll be signs saying, you're not allowed in the area? I don't really understand, because it seems as if there are going to be areas that will remain dangerous to people and certainly children.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on, Julie. I hear your question. but that's not really specific to this additional line of evidence, which we're trying to get at. And so please ask your question again. I'm sorry to keep saying that, but we do want to make sure that we have responses here. So let's go ahead and move on to another. Somebody else have their hand raised?
Yes, we have one hand from Bonnie. Bonnie Hughes. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. So I'm a little confused because I've been to a couple of these, but my question about evidence is that I heard a ton about false positives, and I understand that a little bit. I don't see the risk of any false negatives shown in your lines of evidence. And I'm wondering why should that be in? It's a big risk to people. Shouldn't that be included in the MLE? Or can you help me? Because I don't get that. There's no mention of false negatives.
No,
I'm
I think
sure
that's
that happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Bonnie. So a false negative, just to make sure everybody understands what a false negative is. So a false negative would be that a chemical is detected below its lookup table value. So that would mean we would leave it in place. But then maybe that chemical was there due to site activities. But it would still remain in place because it was below background. And so that may in fact exist, but partially by having some of these different lines of evidence, we would make sure that anything that would be left behind is not left behind at a concentration that would result in any kind of adverse health effect. It's really important. There's kind of our standard, I'm a toxicologist, and our standard in toxicology, kind of like a common thing that we say is the dose makes the poison. And what that really means is that things can be present at very small concentrations and not have any adverse health effects on somebody. There's lots of different, that's the good thing about having lots of different lines of evidence is, let's say that the lookup table value, it was less than the lookup table value, but then we went and we did the risk, we used one of the risk-based scenarios, like the health protective screening level, or in the cumulative risk, and we saw that there was an unacceptable risk associated with that, then that would be required to be cleaned up. The hard thing about false negatives is that, it's hard to prove a false negative. Oops, I just accidentally advanced the slides. So it's hard to prove a false negative, but we do at least have these safeties in place to ensure that we're still being health protective and protective of the environment. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, we can, okay.
Well, one quick, is it too time consuming to explain why it's so difficult to get a false negative?
Well,
that
it's
might
hard
help
to
me.
Yeah, I think it's hard to prove that something is a false negative. Now, if we use the line of evidence that was suggested by Mr. Bowling, where we were looking at the chemicals that were associated with the use there, and so maybe it's somewhere where there's a lot of perchlorate and the perchlorate's there, then, that might be a line of evidence that says, okay, this is below the lookup table, but we know this chemical was used here, and so we think it needs to be remediated. I think that's how you could evaluate that would be a line of evidence you could use to try to look at false negatives. But yeah, it's challenging because it's hard to prove a negative. That's just kind of it's just hard to prove a negative. I don't have a better way to say it, unfortunately, that's coming to my brain, but yeah. I hope that answered your question. I think for the sake of moving forward, let's go. So let's make sure all of our hands we don't have any more hands raised at this time. We don't need to lower any hands. Okay. So now we are going to move into this one, and I imagine we'll have some good discussion here. So is there a line of evidence in this proposal that you think should not be included? Again, the flow chart is listed here. We had the QR code before. I think the link is in the chat. But just to remind everybody real quickly about what these lines of evidence are, we have line 1A, which is the comparison to the background study results. Line 1B is comparison to the laboratory MRL study results, which again, we don't yet have. Line 2 is comparison to the residential health protective screening levels. Line 3 is that cumulative risk and hazard compared to the point of departure for residential land use. And then part 4 is that line 4 is the comparison of the risk and hazard associated with the sample detections versus the acceptable lookup table of values. So with that, we'll go ahead and hear from somebody on a line of evidence that I think should not be included.
Yes, so we have our first question from Jonah. Jonah Henry, go ahead. *6, Jonah, to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Mr. Henry. How are you doing, Jonah?
Hi, sorry, I didn't see the unmute button. All 5 lines of evidence are a violation of the AIOC, so I would suggest that none of those 5 lines of evidence be included. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
We've got a few more hands here. We've got, let's see, Cameron Kuta. Cameron, go ahead.
Hi. So I have a problem with line 1B because there's this false narrative that's been pushed by the polluters that the soil testing labs don't have sensitive enough equipment to reliably achieve what's the MRL, but there's so many things wrong with this claim. For starters, DTSC has already consulted with the labs over a decade ago and based the lookup table values on the MRLs. So we already know that the labs can achieve those. So this happened over a decade ago. The lab's instruments and technology should have gotten better, not worse since then. So there's really no reason to have line 1B or any of the lines because we want to just follow the AOC and just do a cleanup to the lookup table values.
Oh, thank you for providing that. I do just want to note that for the lookup tables that are based off of the background method reporting limit, those were not sent out to multiple labs as some of the other ones were. That was not the multi-lab study to figure out what MRLs were available. There were special methods that were used to try to push those values as low as possible. And when you do that, that really increases uncertainty. And so that's one of the reasons why there's such a high false positive error rate that we see in the background samples is because we did have detections of certain chemicals in background soils, but then we have MRLs that are super, super low that labs cannot reliably achieve. And so there's actually a lot of problematic stuff with some of the MRLs. And then some of the other MRLs, we really asked, I say we, DTSC, I was not on the project then, but there was a request to the labs to look at certain classes of chemicals. And so the MRLs were set on that. So there were definitely some decisions that were made about the MRLs that need to be revisited. So I appreciate you answering the question, and we can certainly expand a little bit more on that if need be in the future. But yeah, thanks so much. Do we have anybody else who's got their hand raised, Reiko?
Yes, we have Daniel. Daniel, go ahead. Daniel Hirsch.
So there are several of these lines of evidence that I believe should be removed. The first is 1A. You said that the DTSC background study was a robust study, but 1A is to not clean up things that are above the level set by DTSC as local background. There was a statistical test the DTSC used called USL 95, which is the least protective standard. And so the numbers that were already set were already inflated. One should not then break the commitment to clean up to background with 1A. 1B, the MRL, was also used by DTSC in setting the lookup table values. It's already been determined. The labs have already said that they could meet those limits. You already determined it. So now trying to come in with weaker MRLs, ones that are what you call reliably achievable, meaning the least sensitive techniques available, is simply again designed to try to get the polluters to not have to clean up. Line 2 is the concentration below a health protective screening level using residential land use. You say over and over again that this is not a risk-based cleanup, but indeed you are using risk to override anything above background. And you have falsely claimed that the standard that you are using is residential unrestricted. If you actually look carefully at the tables in your technical report, it makes clear that you are using residential levels that are orders of magnitude weaker than the true residential land use risk-based standards that are unrestricted, orders of magnitude. And DTSC itself in writing said years ago that if you cleaned up to a rural residential standard as required by its procedures, that was equivalent to background. So 2 should be dumped as well. 3, this cumulative risk, you claim you're not doing risk, but here you're doing risk. And 4, you again looking at risk, claiming risk, again using the standards that you claim are residential but are not, and that would allow thousands of times more contamination to be left behind than the deal you signed, you wrote, the background study you did. And I'm just always amazed that DTSC tells us now to trust its technical confidence and its honesty when it attacks the AOC that it wrote and signed, the background study that it performed, the MRL study.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hirsch. I think you've replied to the question, and so I'm sorry to mute you, but we got a little off topic there. I do want to note that the residential risk-based screening levels that are in the table are the standard residential risk-based screening levels that are issued by US EPA and or by DTSC. Some DTSC has some that are more restrictive, more protective than US EPA. And so in those cases, we use the lower screening levels. Orders of magnitude may look slightly different based off of units. I'm not really sure. So we would be using our standard residential risk-based screening levels that are issued by US EPA and DTSC and are used throughout the state of California and the country for residential land use. So I did just want to correct that. Okay. With that, do we have anybody else? But thank you for your comments. I appreciate hearing from you. Do we have anybody else that has a line of evidence, or what is our time? I just want to do a quick time check so far.
I have something. Hello?
Oh, Dory, yes, you tried to speak earlier and we didn't get to you. Yes, please do go ahead.
Yeah. First, I think Dan Hirsch should be allowed to finish his comments because I think they're important. And to have it really limited is not right. Second, I would agree with him because obviously he's very informed, and with Julie Kornstein and Bill Bowling, what their comments are. I want this site to be completely cleaned up now, period.
Okay, thank you, Dory. I appreciate it. And Mr. Hirsch, we will absolutely give him some more time to complete his thoughts once we get there. Okay, so let's see. Are we ready to move on to our next question?
We had one more from Chris, if we have time.
Okay. We just want to make sure we do give you guys the open forum time at the end, and we still have 2 more questions to get to. So, but please, Chris, go ahead.
Yes, this is Chris Rowe. I would like to state that I was in those meetings when you were establishing the lookup table values. And I want to point out that there's 2 different categories. There's the radionuclides versus the
do you hear it?
The radionuclides versus the chemicals. And I remember very clearly that certain people were telling the federal EPA who were doing the radionuclides to push the labs as low as possible. And you need to be aware, I'm sure you are aware, that one of the issues that we were running into was QA/QC. In other words, quality assurance, quality control, that the numbers could be replicated from one lab to the other. And that has always been problematic for me. And the USL 95 that was referenced earlier, I have always felt that was presented by the US EPA, their consultant from Lockheed. What you're doing by using the US L95 is you're taking off the top roughly 10% of things found in background, and you're lowering your background level, and you took off the lower 10% too, so that if you went back to the site, you would most likely find the same numbers in that location. But two things are important to be aware of. Number one, to me, those upper levels were valid background. And number two, they did not sample the drainages. And a lot of these chemicals and radionuclides congregate or, settle in the drainages. And so that made background problematic for me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And yeah, the radionuclides are we're not talking about those today, but I certainly hear what you're having to say, and we appreciate your feedback. Okay, so we're going to go into yeah, we've spent 13 minutes on this one, so I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. So this one we are asking, is there a line of evidence that you think should be weighted differently? For example, line 1A, which compares to that maximum concentration from our local background reference areas, do you think that that particular one should be weighted more heavily than, say, comparison to the risk-based residential health protective screening level, or maybe the cumulative risk or hazard considering residential land use? Do we currently, all lines of evidence are weighed the same? And again, as I mentioned earlier, if we had 3 supporting lines of evidence, then we would consider that sample is in fact considered consistent with local background and wouldn't require further removal. So does anybody have anything to say about if any of the lines should be weighted any differently? Excuse me.
We've got a couple of hands, Dr. Hanley. We've got a Haken Williams. Haken Williams, go ahead. Haken?
Yep.
Star 6.
Unmute. All right.
Yep. I hear you. Hi, Haken.
Hi. So I just want to note on a procedural level, I'm trying to raise my hand to respond.
Oops.
Lost him.
Are you there? Oh, sorry, we lost you for a second.
Okay. So I'm going to respond to number 4, but I keep trying to raise my hand and my hand keeps getting lowered. I don't know if this is something DTSC is doing. I have a friend who's on the call. She's having the same experience. So I don't know if DTSC is lowering people's hands when they're trying to speak and respond to your questions. In response to this question number 4, yeah, all of the lines should be weighted 0 and DTSC should follow the AOC cleanup to back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. Again, sorry, that's not what we're asking right now. I am sorry to hear if people's hands are getting lowered. That's not our intent, other than between the different questions. I'm not seeing everybody's hand, so I can't speak to that. Reiko, do we have any additional hands that are raised for this particular question?
Yes, we do. Cameron Kuta. Cameron Kuta, go ahead. Cameron.
Hi, Thanks for taking my answer to this question. So I think line 1A should probably be way more powerful than the other lines. And I also think that it should be modified so that the measured concentration is being compared to the lookup table values rather than to the maximum concentration.
Sorry, I was a little fast on my mute button, I will say. That would be that would be not using any lines of evidence if we were comparing it to the lookup table. I will go ahead and take you off mute. I was a little fast on my trigger finger. I'm gonna be honest with that, but I do just want to make sure we're staying focused. Do you have a thought as to how much more you think 1A and the 1A that is listed here and not the lookup table values should be?
Well, I don't understand why it can't be the lookup table values, because that was what has been in use, and we know that it works.
Well, I think that I don't want to get into a debate, but we know that the lookup tables don't work as they are, which is why we're here right now. Not all of them. It's not a blanket statement, but we know that there are issues, and we know that there are concentrations that were detected in our background soils that are background. And so that is why we wanted to use this line of evidence. So we were really looking at all of those. Okay, do we have anybody else who wanted to speak to this question?
Yes, we have Melissa. Melissa, go ahead. Melissa?
Are you there, Melissa?
We lost her. We've got a couple more hands. Last three digits, 528. 528. Go ahead. Last three digits, 528. Go ahead with your question. We may have lost both of them.
Oh, no, they're here. Hi.
That are false negative. Oh, yeah, this is Laura Rosenberger Heider. The tests that come out you think are false negative, just to repeat them all and just take a lot of samples so that maybe you can confirm it as a positive.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying just retest the soil to make sure. I do want to say that, so sometimes we talk about false positives and false negatives as being errors in the analytics. And in this particular case, we're talking analytics, meaning how the labs actually are able to evaluate the sample. So if you reevaluated that sample, maybe you would get a different answer. And so there's that kind of false positive, false negative, which has to do with the ability of the labs. The types of false positive and false negatives we're talking about here are looking at the concentrations that are detected, that we have good certainty about those concentrations, and that a concentration could be above a lookup table value, but still be consistent with local background. Or for a false negative, it would be below a lookup table value, but due to contamination. So just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page about that. But I hear you that you're saying retest the sample to try to confirm. So thank you for answering that. Thank you. I think we're gonna did you have anything to say about whether we should weight any of the lines differently than the others?
Can you repeat the lines again?
Yeah, so the first line 1A is the detection consistent with local background? So that's using looking at the full background data set from the chemical background reference areas. Line 1B is the method reporting limit achievable? So this is if we had a non-detect and the reporting limit was below the MRL based lookup table value. But if that one isn't even achievable, we don't have a sample detected, let's actually use an achievable MRL. The second line of evidence is comparing to the residential health protective screening level. So that would be each chemical that's detected above a lookup table value would be compared to its residential health protective screening level. And then the next two look at cumulative risk and hazards. That's looking at overall risk and hazard to humans. And so this is looking and making sure that that would be health protective on an individual sample basis to a residential land use, which again, this is very different from how those are normally. We would look at a whole like residential plot and consider that and compare it to the cumulative risk to the point of departure. But here, each individual sample would be compared that way. And then the last one is that cumulative risk and hazard, but it's comparing the sample to the approved lookup table values.
Still thinking about it.
Well, we've got some more time moving forward. So if you have a thought, then you can certainly raise your hand again, or please submit through our stream platform, and we'd be happy to hear from you. But I think is Melissa? Can we try Melissa again, since she's not there, or is she? Melissa, are
Go
you
ahead,
there?
Melissa.
Hi, the mute button came up this time. Thank you. Yeah, I was under the impression when I was reading through this that 1 would be the main 99% of the weight. And then if the chemical wasn't detected in the background study, then you'd start to look at all the other lines of evidence. So I'm kind of concerned that this all have equal weight. I'm especially concerned with number 3 because it's showing, the risk hazard is 10 to the -4. That's 1 in 100,000 people. That is not I mean, I don't know who would consider that health protective. Certainly not the residents.
Sorry, just to clarify, if the risk was at 1 times 10 to the -4, then that sample would absolutely have to be removed. And just to give some context as to how we're looking at the risk numbers, and 1 times 10 to the -4 is 1 in 10,000. So I'm even gonna just note that. This is the risk management range that US EPA has said. It's part of the, oh gosh, I'm not good with my statutes, but it's part of the National Contingency Plan that says, if you have a risk above 10 to the -4, it requires cleanup. And if you have a risk below 10 to the -6 or 1 in a million, then no cleanup is needed. And then the area in between is what's known as a risk management zone. So anyways, just to give context to that. Now, I do also want to note, this is, again, being done on a sample by sample basis, which is not how that would typically be applied. Typically, that would be applied to an entire site property. And if the whole site had a risk higher than 1 times 10 to the -4, remediation would be needed. So I just wanted to clarify that. But then please continue, Melissa.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't like that gray range between 10 to the -4 and 10 to the -6. And I just see this as an opportunity for the DTSC to kind of take on what California does well, which is set gold standards in environmentalism, especially right now with the federal outlook not being as health protective probably for the next 4 years. So when I see this whole lines of evidence, it just doesn't, I mean, the AOC was created to be the most protective. Well, I'll save mine for the other comments, but I do not feel that the other lines of evidence should have any weight at all, except for number 1, was it detected in the background study? The rest of this just seems bringing in risk that's unreasonable. As a resident, I don't want to live with this.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your comment, Melissa. I do want to note that we really are evaluating risk. This would be very protective, even if this was used for residential land use. I believe in the gold standard of California. We do things very right here in California, and we are leading the way. And I think all of us at DTSC feel really good about that. But I hear what you're saying, and I hear your concerns. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the last one. So all hands are lowered at this.
Am I able to speak? I was told that I was unmuted.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Audrey. I didn't realize we had that you were there.
No, I've actually raised my hand a few times and been skipped over. So just wanted to let you know that technical issues happening. Yeah. So in response to this question, I want to revisit line 1A. You offered a correction earlier that I would like to respond to. This issue you keep on mentioning about false positives with this test, 54% false positives is what was shown in your last meeting. This is actually less than 10% if you remove the non-detected samples, which you are claiming they would have to clean up, and including that in the calculation for the false positives. You would not be expected to clean up non-detect samples. And then if you also drop the rest of the percentage down based on the fact that it's grossly inflated with herbicides and pesticides, which are not what the cleanup is about and should not be used as a justification to weaken the cleanup standards for the rest of the contaminants that are highly toxic chemicals. And just because you used some, orders of magnitude, I want you to know that if you actually do the math, the MLE approach numbers compared to the lookup table values in some times are multiple millions of times less protective. You simply can't tell us that that is protective of human health. 7 million times less protective is the most egregious ratio. And even against the Boeing numbers, it's up to 20,000 of times. I don't understand how anyone can possibly believe that this is protective of human health when previously established protective human health reference numbers are being exceeded by hundreds of thousands of times.
Okay. Thank you for your comment, Audrey. So I do want to speak to your first comment about the 54% false positive. So you're right that in that percentage, we are including the non-detects. So, and those are concentrations that are non-detects, but the reporting limit was above the lookup table value. There is actually not any clause within the AOC that says that there wouldn't need to be cleanup. It says that if you fail the lookup table value, that this site needs to be cleaned. So I think that is not totally accurate to say that we wouldn't require any cleanup there. I think it is a gray area personally, but the AOCs don't say anything that give us an out for that. So, and I agree with you that a lot of it is these herbicides and things like that, but those do have lookup table values. And if those were exceeded on the site, those would require cleanup.
Sure,
and
I
so
think
that's
I
okay. I'm
appreciate
sorry.
your
I would like to finish what I'm saying, and then I'll let you talk again. Thank you.
You're misunderstanding my question. I'm not trying to interrupt you. My comment is that even with the 54% false positive rate, even with the stipulation that these would have to be addressed, even though they're herbicides and pesticides, it is not appropriate to use that justification to rework all of the standards for every other toxic chemical. It's simply not proper science. It doesn't make any sense because this test has some flaws. You're now going to allow hundreds of thousands of times more pollution. It doesn't make any logical sense.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. I appreciate you speaking, and I have heard that you've done a lot of your own analysis, and we would love for you to submit that through Stream for us to be able to look and see, what it is that you have there. I want to say just because a number is a million times lower doesn't necessarily mean it's a million times more protective. If a value is if a lookup table value is based off of an MRL that is millions of times lower than a health protective screening level, then you're not actually getting any added protection of human health, and you're unnecessarily destroying habitat for a lot of special species that are protected species of plants and animals, and habitat, and just the cultural site itself. So with that, it is 7:30. I will go to the next question. I think that I think that most of you will be able to say your open forum type of comments in this. So I think I'm going to kind of have an audible here, call an audible, and we can move into it. And I would just say, if you have an answer to this question, then please include it. So the fifth question was, do you support the proposed approach? If yes, why? If no, why? I would love to hear from everybody regarding this. I think for the sake of everybody having the ability to speak their mind, excuse me, I'm going to go ahead and move on really quickly and say, if you had a comment that you weren't able to state tonight, or an additional question that you would like answers to, again, we do ask that you use our Stream portal. We are asking excuse me, I'm so sorry. We are asking for feedback by March 30th. Now, this isn't an official public comment period. So if you have comments after March 30th, we will consider those, but we really do need to move forward. We want to move forward with this cleanup. We need an approach to move forward with, and continuing with the not to exceed approach using the current lookup table values is not going to work. And that is not how we are going to move forward and give you all the cleanup that you deserve. And we really do want to get moving forward and get this cleanup going. So again, there's our stream platform. With that, I'm gonna turn it back over to Reiko to help us through our open forum for these last 30 minutes. But I do hope that you will consider the question about whether or not you support the multiple lines of evidence approach when you are able to speak during the open forum. And with that, I will hand it back over to Reiko.
Thank you again, Dr. Hanley. Thank you, thank you. We now will take more questions and comments. Again, each participant will have 2 minutes allotted per question or comment. You may also type your questions or your input into the stream tool. To participate, if you've joined by computer, *6 to unmute or mute. Also, *9 to raise or lower your hand. When called on, please unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your comment. You may rejoin the queue to ask additional questions. And we've got some hands. Let's see. We've got, it's like Daniel Hirsch. Daniel Hirsch, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This evening has been an embarrassment. You say that you were soliciting public comment on your proposal, and every time someone tried to comment on it, you cut, or almost every time you cut them off. Essentially, every claim that DTSC has made is false. It claims the false positive rate for its own background measurements would be 54%, but you've just admitted that there's nothing in the AOC that says you're supposed to count a non-detect as a detect. The true false positive rate would be a few percent. And what you're now proposing would create astronomical false negatives, soil that's not cleaned up even though contaminated. You claim that your MLE approach is viewed by EPA as best practice, but in fact, EPA cleans up sites to individual numeric cleanup standards, remediation goals, just like the lookup table has. And DTSC has pointed to no EPA soil standards, anything like DTSC's MLE approach. You claim not to.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. We're going to
go
to
be
the
2
next
minutes.
person. We're going to go to the next person. Thank you so much.
That cannot be 2 minutes.
Yeah, we were supposed to get 2 minutes each. It says right there on the screen, each person will be allotted 2 minutes.
You're cutting your own throats. I challenge you to a public debate. If you're telling the truth, you should have no fear of debating in public instead of muzzling people who can have facts that show that what you're telling is a lie. So I'll be muzzled, but I think the muzzling speaks louder than if you let me speak.
We've got another comment from a Jenny Knack. Jenny, go ahead. Jenny, go ahead. *6 or *9.
Hi, I've got the unmute. I just recorded Daniel Hirsch's comments and they ran, I believe, 47 seconds. So I'm looking at a screen that said he should have been given 2 minutes. That wasn't going to be the bulk of my comment, but here we go. I hope someone's timing mine.
I apologize.
Then give him his other minute and 15 seconds. My biggest concern is that this meeting, like your other meetings, are being used as a metric that you are going to report to the Board of Environmental Safety, and you're going to report to our electeds on legislative panels that oversee DTSC funding as having conducted sessions to gather public comment. But what we just have been experiencing tonight is like nothing I've ever experienced. You actually only are interested in the comments from the DOE apologists and the polluter responsible party supporters. those are the comments that you are not cutting off. And the most informed comments from the analysts, and we know that you know who they are the people who aren't being allowed to express for everyone to hear what they understand in the numbers. And that is incredibly concerning. The other concerning aspect of this is that while the background study was done over a decade ago, your issues with it have only been rolled out in coordination with DOE's plan to try to attain the same cleanup standards that Boeing negotiated with you in backroom deals 3 years ago. Boeing didn't sign the AOCs, but DTSC and DOE and NASA did. And what we expect as community members, people who live around the site, is that the AOCs are implemented and executed. We hear that you are saying that they are not implementable. And unfortunately, because of your track record, we actually don't believe you. And we have independent scientists who are fact checking you and pointing out the falsehoods and how
Jenny, you've reached your 2 minutes.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to Daniel Hirsch to allow Daniel to finish his comment.
Thank
Daniel.
you.
Go ahead, Daniel. Okay, Daniel might be gone. We've still got some other hands up for comments. We've got Chris Rowe. Chris Rowe, go ahead.
Hi, I would like to make it very clear, I think I did this at the past meeting, that the AOC was specifically designed to conform to SB 990. And SB 990 was found to be unconstitutional by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And therefore, if you look at both AOCs, that's why it was signed by NASA and the DOE. And that's why I believe the AOCs should be void and there should be one cleanup standard consistent through the site. And that was one of the comments from the federal EPA, was that the cleanup standards throughout the site need to be consistent. Because if Boeing cleans up to one standard and NASA and DOE clean up to another, and all we need is one wind or rain event, the contaminants from the Boeing side will recontaminate where you've cleaned up to a stricter level. So you need to be consistent through the site. And I greatly appreciate the risk-based approach and the science that you give us. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Dr. Hanley.
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Thank you for your comments, Chris. I do want to say, you know, the AOCs are contracts between us, between DTSC and NASA, and then DTSC and DOE. And so while I hear what you're saying about SB 990 being unconstitutional, that really doesn't have any bearing on the AOCs themselves. And DTSC is committed to the AOCs and the cleanup to background that are required per the AOCs. So I just wanted to state that. And yeah, go ahead with the next question.
Yep, we've got NASA. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. NASA. NASA, go ahead with your comment or question. NASA.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
It takes a full 8 seconds or so for the option to unmute to appear. So just give people a chance. I'm just really a little heartbroken watching this presentation today. People are obviously scared and hurt and speaking from the heart. And this presentation makes it look like the state does not want to stand by their commitment to clean up this very contaminated site that is leading to people getting cancer. That's a really bad look for the state of California. And for somebody who lives in the Santa Susana Knolls area, I'm concerned about growing food in the ground. And I don't think the state should be going back on what they committed to. I think they should commit to the original agreement, clean up to background levels, and I just don't think it's right to treat people the way that they've been treated here today. Everybody is giving up 2 hours out of their evening to try to protect their environment and their families. Thank you.
Thank you. We've
And
got another comment from Rocky Rose. Rocky Rose, go ahead.
Hi, I am an elected in Simi Valley, and Dr. Hanley, I want to say thank you for the presentation and trying to get everyone up to speed. I raised my hand on the which should be more weighted, and I love the idea that we would get put more weight on one of these, and that would be the residential background. And if the idea is that we could clean up to a place where one could live on this area year round, the ultimate goal, I think, is let's get started on cleanup, and whatever is the most stringent should be given the most weight. But I appreciate the education that you're providing us, and I really hope we get started. And so that I understand. I hear the passions of the people that have been delved into this probably longer than I have. And if we can get to a place where it is deemed safe, let's pick that as the weight. The idea of background based on areas that are not necessarily this area, they might be good to put less weight on those and more weight on could we actually live and survive and thrive and hike and picnic in these areas again. And I also appreciate your emphasis on protecting habitat, and it's a delicate balance, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I hope that we get to that place where we can really get started on cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another comment from last 3 digits 528. Last 3 digits 528. What?
Hello, this is Laura Rosenberger Hyder. We should really look at the cumulative risk in our calculations. And there's a lot of water pollution, like the vinyl chloride and the dichloroethene and TCE. And there's like it says 36 previously detected individual analytes that were detected at new maximum values in 2024. We can add all that into it. That'll probably be closer to the background, what we need to do to protect people's health.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura Rosenberg, I think it was. Thank you. We've got a couple more comments. We've got, let's see, Bonnie Hughes. Bonnie Hughes. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay. I was waiting for the mute button to give me the mic. So I have a comment that I'd like to make, and that is that there's a plethora of jargon and information and forms and these lectures, but if you are not a scientist, they're not helpful, and they're not, I don't find myself feeling good about them in comparison to how I feel knowing that I live by such a toxic site and that I can't see my grandchildren, and that there are a lot of things that come along with living near Santa Susana that are not pleasant. And I guess my question and my concern is why you don't take an approach that people have spoken of this evening, where you would debate those figures and that science and some of the argumentative and the other side that's being presented by people that do know and that have knowledge. I would really encourage that you do that, because that's a much more trustworthy methodology for getting the residents that want to believe and want to trust and want to support this and have only a cleanup in mind, whatever it looks like, and that it gets started as soon as possible. But there's no effort made to involve those other scientists, and there's no seemingly support for presenting the comparisons. And I think that for me, a comparison would be a great way to understand some of this. And I wish that
Thank
you
you
would.
so much, Bonnie. Thank you so much. We have a couple more folks that would like to speak. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Bonnie. All right, we have a Mark Oskow. Mark Oskow. Mark, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
It does take a while to find the which is have to do to unmute. When I attend these meetings, I'm always amazed. Several things. It always strikes me after a lot of the comments that criticize DTSC, Boeing, DOE, NASA, etc., that they're simply not paying attention to the reality on the ground at Santa Susana. So here you have a site that's flourishing biologically. We're talking about soils here, and the site is full of burrowing animals that live their entire lives in or just the surface of soils. You've got ground squirrels, you've got rabbits, you've got kangaroo rats, you've got pocket mice, you've got snakes, you've got endangered lizards, so all sorts of creatures that live in the soils that are supposed to be so contaminated that they're going to cause cancer at higher than normal rates, or cause other dreaded illnesses from the animals being exposed to hazardous chemicals. It's just out of touch with reality. So I had considered raising this issue of adding this to the MLE as a way to assess the animal life and the plant life, of course, in any area where you have samples being collected and analyzed, to see how well they're doing in those areas that are supposed to be contaminated. And that should be one of the things that's considered in the MLEs. So I wasn't prepared to comment. I was just going to sit and listen today. So I'll just end it there for now. Thank you.
If I just
Thank
could,
you, Mark.
Reiko, before you move on to the next person, thank you, Mark. If you could please submit your comment via stream with some additional details on how you think we could do that, or how that could potentially look, I would be very interested in hearing more.
I wish I could
Thank
do
you.
it.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a couple more. We've got Haken Williams. Haken Williams, go ahead.
All right, just waiting on that unmute button. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, like most people here tonight, I most certainly do not support DTSC's MLE proposal. This is a pivotal moment in the cleanup, and DTSC is making a bold play to walk away from its commitment to enforce and implement the AOC under cover of this convoluted and, yes, completely unnecessary multiple lines of evidence nonsense. None of DTSC's claims survive scrutiny. The AOC and the lookup table values are perfectly implementable as they are. DTSC just doesn't want to. DTSC, you should rename your MLE proposal to multiple lines of excuses, because that's what we've heard you propose tonight. DTSC has no right to propose this grievous destruction of the AOC. The AOC plainly requires a not to exceed approach, cleaning up all contaminated soil that exceeds the lookup table values, period. The leeway to mess with this that DTSC claims it has just doesn't exist. DTSC is misrepresenting what the AOC says in order to garner community approval for tearing up the AOC. None of DTSC's claims, I want to reiterate, none of them about the supposed need for a new approach to SSFL cleanup bear scrutiny. Scratch at the surface of DTSC's assertions, you'll find there's in fact no false positives problem, no reason to think that the labs can't use the existing lookup table values, and no reason to let DTSC substitute a vastly weaker cleanup under the MLE for the existing protective cleanup as described in the AOC. If DTSC really stands by this multiple lines of evidence approach, then DTSC should agree to a debate on a level playing field with its critics in the community, not this laughable setup we've seen tonight where substantive criticisms get cut off. If you really believe your claims stand up to scrutiny, and if you really care about building trust with the community, then engage with us in an open format debate, a real discussion where we can talk about what really matters rather than being herded into answering the limited questions you've allowed us to speak on. This is unacceptable, DTSC. We need you to stand for our community, not come up with
Thank you, Haken. We've got to move on. We've got a couple more comments. Marianne, go ahead. Marianne King.
Thank you. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wait, I just think I'm muted again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. So sorry. First time joining this discussion. It's been a long time. I want to say what Mark Asakau just talked about is the first thing that hit me was the fact that we're focusing on the impact for residential, but we're not considering the wildlife habitat. To me, that is just number one, critical. This is a wildlife habitat area, so the MLE should be based on that level, not which is a more restrictive but critical and important level. So thank you, Mark, and I hope you will take this into consideration. Thank you.
If I could just very quickly say, the bulk of our human health risk assessment screening levels that are used in these lines of evidence are also protective of ecological risk. And so we are also evaluating those impacts to the animals that live on the site. So I did just want to note that.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. A couple more hands. Julie Korenstein. Julie Korenstein, go ahead.
Thank you. Rightfully so that so many people are extremely concerned about how well the cleanup will be done. It's been 65 years since the partial meltdown, and it's a long, long time, and many people becoming ill. I now currently have my granddaughter and her husband and my great-grandson living in Simi Valley. And so I worry every day about water and air pollution and whether they will become ill. My question is really the chronology. I remember something about burn pit. Was it number 4? This was like a month or 2 ago that was supposed to be cleaned up. What happened with that? That's question number 1. Question number 2, I remember at one of the meetings saying that will take 15 years to complete the cleanup. Can you please answer those questions?
Yeah, I can answer that, Julie. So Area 1 burn pit is what you're referring to. And that is in the Boeing area versus today we're focusing on NASA and DOE. But I will let you know that cleanup has been underway. And I believe they're still doing some final confirmation sampling, but it is very close to being complete. That is an interim cleanup based off of ecological risk. But that interim cleanup is almost complete. And I think we're going to have we expect the excavation to be complete in late March. So very soon we will be done with that excavation, and I know we have a planned
we have an update on it so that we know what's going on. I see big trucks going by every now and then, and I worry that Are they, carrying the soil? I don't know where the soil is being taken. We haven't been given any current information on it.
Yeah, I know that we do have a fact sheet that is planned, or a community update, I'm sorry, that is planned, that will be released as soon as that cleanup is complete. So I would say probably look for that in April. That will of course be communicated through the typical channels. And in terms of the timing for the cleanup, we agree we need to get this cleanup going. We want to get this cleanup going, and that is really why we are here today, to hear your comments and to work on getting a path forward and implementing the AOCs. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. A couple more. Melissa Bomstead.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bumstead with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab. I noticed that the backfill study isn't set to be done till spring 2026, and that's really shocking considering this whole cleanup was meant to be completely done by 2017. So that's 10 years almost after when this whole thing was meant to be done. That we're back, we're further behind on the deadline than we were before. In 2018, the Department of Energy had many of these same arguments, and their EIS, I believe, about why the background cleanup wasn't feasible. And at that time, DTSC came up with a good response and said that was feasible and that it would be, they would hold DOE to these background cleanups. So I find it shocking that they've allowed the backfill study to go this late into the game, and that in 2018, they said that the background study could be done based on the lookup tables that are over a decade have been considered very reliable. That's something we've never had to argue through before. And it just feels to me like this is all a result of the settlement agreement, which is what we predicted, that if DTSC went into any kind of negotiation with the responsible parties to start weakening backgrounds, the other responsible parties would push back and try to get the same thing. The thing that's shocking is, we expect that from the responsible parties. Guys, sorry, my kids are in the room. We expect that from them, but we don't expect that from DTSC. You're supposed to be the agency protecting us from the responsible parties getting out of the cleanup, and that's clearly not happening. One little thing I want to point out to Mark and the other lady who had comments about the cultural and ecological assets at the Santa Susana Field Lab. I get the impression that DTSC thinks their cleanup is going to destroy those when the mitigation measures
Sorry, Melissa. We have a couple more comments, and we also are almost out of time. Let's see. We've got Cameron. I think you're going to be our last one. Cameron.
Hi, yeah, just to finish what Melissa was saying, the AOCs do protect the biological and cultural resources on the site, so she was completely right on that, and there's really no need to do MRL and, multiple lines of evidence, because we're already protected by the AOCs. So I would also be really interested in a debate. A lot of people have mentioned that. I think you need to give equal time to the concerns, and there's a lot of research that community members have been doing that we haven't really been able to say any of it. We haven't gotten the chance to. And it's really interesting how someone brought up that the false positive number goes down to 10% when you take out the non-detects and the herbicides and pesticides, which aren't really a big part of this cleanup. And for non-detects, you wouldn't clean those up because they're not detected. So DTSC just lied live on this call to us, and you can see that. So it's just this is just so ridiculous. Like, we can all see what's happening here. And I just want to say I don't support the MLE approach because DTSC has optimized this approach so that the responsible parties have the least obligation to do the cleanup. If you look at that graphic that they presented, the 5 green lines lead to no cleanup, and then there's only 2 red lines that lead to cleanup. So they're giving off ramps to the responsible parties so that they don't have to do the cleanup. I have so much more to say. I just can't fit it into 2 minutes. I really think there needs to be a debate on this. And your DTSC is just misrepresenting what the AOC says. And we all know that the lookup table values work. These lies after lies.
Thank you, Cameron. I'm sorry. We have one last comment from Aubrey. Aubrey, you will absolutely be our last comment. Aubrey Ford, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah.
Audrey, I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say, apparently this is necessary to get some, credibility and respect. I also have a degree in a hard science, and I wanted to respond to this notion that cleaning up the site to any level that is protective of human health would be too invasive toward biological vectors. This is simply not true, first of all, because the way that these cleanups and remediations would be performed are supposed to accommodate for that. But beyond that, the more threatening element of this to all the biological receptors, plants, animals, all of it, is living in a site that is contaminated. As a biologist, you can't truly believe that it would be more damaging to the overall health of the biological community to dig up contaminated soil versus having them burrowing, nesting, reproducing, eating, consuming, living in, swimming in highly, highly toxic waste. It's just insane. The clear threat is leaving this contamination in place. And everything we've seen tonight, everything we've seen for the last, I don't know, tens of years, has just been more and more chipping away at trying to just make this weaker and weaker and weaker. There's one task. Is it contaminated above a protective value? Yes, clean it up. That's all. That's all we're asking for. And pushing this can down the road for decades is simply just continuing to spread contamination. It's crazy. You can't expect the public to go along with this and just be happy with this, even though you're saying it with smiles and really politely and saying you're so sorry when you cut us off. It doesn't matter that you're sorry because your behavior is not reflecting you giving any type of real consideration to what the public is screaming at you. Please listen to us. Please let us speak to you. Please let us debate. Don't just brush us off and gaslight us by giving us this fun little facade to tolerate the concerned community members. That's unacceptable, and you need to reject this MRE approach and follow the AOCs like you agreed 2 years ago.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Audrey. We have a couple comments actually from our panel. Comments from our panel, I believe.
Yeah, I just I hear everybody that spoke here tonight, and I hear that you didn't appreciate us trying to really have a focused conversation with our focused questions. We really were trying to get some good feedback. I'm very genuine and honest in wanting to collaborate with the public and hearing everything that you have to say. This has not been a show for anyone, and this is not an official public comment. I did want to speak to that. Jenny mentioned that earlier. If anything is going to officially change with the lookup tables, which there's not current plans to, that would, of course, go under an official public comment period. But this is really just a conversation. I will say, all I can say is that I have looked at this. I've looked at the science. I do have a PhD in toxicology. I've worked for the department for 16 years. I am very dedicated to the cleanup of the environment, and that is exactly what we're doing. We want this cleanup to move forward. It has to move forward. We want to hold the responsible parties to the contamination, to cleaning up that contamination that they put on this site. 100%, we want that to happen, and we have to have another path forward. And I do absolutely ask those of you who are independent scientists who have done this work to please submit your comments through Stream, and we would appreciate that. In terms of debate, we are asking you to create comments on the science the DTSC has evaluated and we presented here tonight. We are, this is science. We're not going to debate, but we did give you all this time to say your comments, and we truly do care about them. We do care about this community, and we do want you to have the cleanup that you deserve, and we want this cleanup to start. And that is really, truly our goal. And I think that we're going to have some closing remarks by Thanberg, our Deputy Director of the cleanup program.
It's not science, it's pseudoscience that you've created to allow DOE
And someone
and
please
NASA
mute Jonah Henry, because this
lead
is
the-
not, no, sorry, Jonah, this is not your time. You had time earlier to speak. We're not going to be interrupted that way. Thank you. Than?
Yes, hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hanley. Thank you all for coming, and I know that this is a hard conversation, and I very much appreciate everyone's words, and we very much are taking everything you're saying into consideration. And I know there's a lot of emotion around this cleanup. I just want to say something about the guiding principles about where we're coming from. One, we are completely committed to the AOCs and to a clean up the background. We have some issues that we have to get around in order to get to the cleanup and make it happen. Two, we want to make sure we don't needlessly destroy natural habitat, wildlife habitat, and cultural resources that belong to tribal communities. That's something else that has not been spoken about tonight, but I wanted to let you know that we also have a trust responsibility to tribes, and that is a deep concern to us that we feel committed to respect. But finally, we need to get to cleanup. It's been way too long. Melissa, you mentioned this yourself, and we want to get to cleanup. And if we can't get past some of these hurdles in order to be able to implement a cleanup, we will never get there. Again, I want to say thank you for participating. I know this was not necessarily an easy conversation for a lot of folks, but we really are listening to you and very much appreciate your time. Stream is available by all means. Keep on sending in your comments through that avenue. We are definitely looking at them. And again, have a good night, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Than. Thank you. So I want to remind everyone to visit the Soil Smarts webpage to review any workshop-related materials from the NASA and DOE workshops. And I also want to remind everyone to stay connected, ways to stay involved. Our DTSC SSFL webpage contains detailed site documents. It contains contact information and information on how to receive project updates. We also encourage you to visit EnviroStore, which is DTSC's data management system for tracking and cleanup and more. As Dan said, please continue to share your feedback with us, additional comments with us, as well as asking any questions using our new Stream tool. Access Stream by visiting the DTSC webpage, or you can use the Stream page at the URL on your screen. Thank you again to our presenter, Dr. Valerie Hanley. We'd also like to thank you all for taking the time out of your evening to participate in the third SSFL Soils Smarts Workshop. The Zoom will remain open for 2 minutes after this public workshop to obtain any information that we've posted in the chat that is for your review. Enjoy your evening again, and good night.